Just to prove that I'm doing this on behalf of Kanishka, there is a little introduction when he says, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Anu Majumdar and the rest of the Auroville Literature Festival for this opportunity to be in conversation with Karen about her brilliant novel, An Island. Karen, thank you for being here from Kanishka. Unfortunately, I'm unable to make it to the event owing to some last-minute personal emergencies. But I'm immensely grateful for the festival for kindly agreeing to host this Q&A and Anu for this on my behalf. So let's just get started. The whole thing is actually from him. So Karen Jennings is a South African author whose novel An Island has been longlisted for the Booker Prize, for which she is also a co-winner of South Africa's K. Sello Duiker Memorial Award. But prior to this, she was also shortlisted for the Etisalat Prize, that's right, okay, for literature, and has been recipient of the Africa Region Prize of the Commonwealth Short Story Competition for From Dark, as well as the English section of the Maskew Miller Longman Literature Award for her short story Mia and the Dark. Despite her prior literary success, publishing An Island was not an easy feat. The story of Samuel, a craven revolutionary turned political fugitive, self-exiled to an island off the coast of an unnamed African country after release from prison, was one this publishing market was not ready for yet. The novel is chock full of uncomfortable realities, such as haphazardly buried bodies because the government only values certain lives, a newly independent country that quickly succumbs to a corrupt government, and the complacence of citizens who would make do under a dictator rather than engage with upheaval. And yet, at the heart of the story is one washed-up corpse upon the island that is not actually a corpse. And in dealing with this intruder, spurs up to a gruesome finale, Samuel reconnects with his past as a revolutionary. I warn you, 20 questions, Karen. So we'll see how far we can go. Yeah. Would you actually like to start with a short paragraph from the book first, and then we'll take the questions?
Firstly, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I've been to India twice before on writers' residencies, and I absolutely love it here. And I find Auroville very peaceful and calming. I will just read the first paragraph from the novel. I think that's probably the easiest to give you an introduction to my style and the tone. It was the first time that an oil drum had washed up on the scattered pebbles of the island shore. Other items had arrived over the years: ragged shirts, bits of rope, cracked lids from plastic lunchboxes, braids of synthetic material made to resemble hair. There had been bodies too, as there was today, the length of it stretched out beside the drum, one hand reaching forward as though to indicate that they had made the journey together and did not now wish to be parted.
Thank you. So now, Karen, you have had your share of publication and acclaim even prior to An Island. And yet the novel was met with little excitement, ultimately rejected even by your prior publishers, until it was picked up by a small indie publisher. Even then, the print run was minuscule, and it was challenging to find endorsements. What revelations has this provided you about the publishing landscape? Is there any such thing as unsanitary writing? What do you have to say about the inevitable censorship that has been placed upon voices that need to be heard? And what could be the way out of it?
Well, my journey as a writer has been very lonely, very difficult. I was not able to ever get published in South Africa, which was very frustrating for me because I see myself as a South African writer before anything else. I write about my country, I write about my continent, and there was simply never anyone that wanted to publish me. I know that a lot of people, they see it as the ideal to be published in the UK or America. That was never my intention, but it was the fact that I couldn't get published in my country that I went to the UK to look for publishers, small publishers. I wasn't trying to become famous or anything. I just wanted my book to be published and have a few people read it. And so I started with a very, very small publisher, and they published, I think, 5 of my books. And then they didn't want an island. They said it was too experimental. I then managed to get an agent who sent it to all the big publishers, Faber and I don't know, all the big ones. And they said, either, this was very confusing, they said either it's too African or not African enough. And what this led me to understand is that there's an idea around the world of what African writing is, what an African writer looks like, and what should be coming out of Africa, so that we within Africa are being told from the outside what we need to be writing, which is very frustrating. And so I eventually, by myself, found a small UK publisher who decided to publish an island. It came out round about the time of the pandemic. We we got, I don't think we even got any reviews. I don't think we had endorsement quotes. We had nothing. And I had just decided, well, for various reasons, it wasn't only because of that, I thought my writing career is over. I don't enjoy it. The joy of writing had gone for me. And it wasn't because I wanted fame and fortune and money. It was that I saw how the industry was, and it was very depressing. And with the pandemic on top of that, and we were in lockdown, and I was in Brazil. I was married to a Brazilian, and I was away from home, and I just got depressed and lost interest in writing. And then, lo and behold, an island was very unexpectedly longlisted for the Booker Prize. I hadn't even known it had been submitted. And I know that this is very ungrateful to confess to, but when I found out about that, I took a long walk and I was really angry. Normally you would think, wow, my novel that no one read has been longlisted for the Booker, amazing. But I actually felt really angry. I felt, this is not fair, because I knew what was coming. Already I was getting invitations for interviews from within South Africa. I was getting requests, oh, can we publish? Are you still looking for a publisher? And I thought, why does it have to depend on people on the outside? 5 judges in the UK telling you that I'm worthwhile, that now you decide, okay, maybe she's worth something. So it wasn't against the Booker Prize people that I was angry. It was within my own country, and it's not only limited to South Africa. I think all over Africa, and I believe it's similar in India, where there's this idea that you have to be recognized from the West, from somewhere else, bigger and better, before you mean anything. Now I've lost track of the question.
The second question.
Okay.
So that's, let me just see. So, I mean, the second question was basically how it came to the Booker and what it meant. But he had a question, Where do you draw the line between being critical to oneself and believing in your work? Question to you. And to publishers, is perhaps something like this in a market dominated by ideas that would sell, yeah, and those that will not? How do you carve a place for essential voices, such as an island, to be heard? How do we get them to sell? Well, that's a question for the publishers, not for you, really. Yeah, but I just put it out to the audience. So the next one, again, what you said, that you consider yourself as a South African writer, but whether this factor comes in. So his question is, as a white author, you have expressed apprehensions about the potential of cultural appropriation when it comes to voices you express in your work. Here we have a complex intersection of writing, not just with publishing and the marketplace, but also politics. Is writing pristine and standalone, or is it mired with civics of its contemporary times? Should it be that way? How does one decide what writing is appropriate and what isn't? And how does it relate to what is appropriate to publish and what isn't? Who should decide that?
I think it's always going to be very individual. No one can decide for everyone that something is appropriate or inappropriate. And one thing that I have been very conscious of is my race. I can't deny it. I'm white. I'm very, very white. I got sunburned about 15 minutes of sun yesterday. And because of the very complex history in South Africa, that is a very sensitive issue. And with my very first novel, which was set on a small fishing village on the west coast of South Africa and had white protagonists, but also colored protagonists. Colored is not a pejorative term in South Africa. It's a cultural group. It refers to people of mixed race. And so I was very nervous about speaking for anyone or representing someone and causing offense. To the extent that with that first novel, as I was writing the first draft, I became more and more nervous so that I took out all dialogue because I didn't want to be putting words into people's mouths. I also didn't give them names because I felt like I didn't want to be possessing anyone. And you can imagine that it was completely unreadable, a novel where no one has a name, where no one speaks, and you just have he's and she's wandering around doing nothing. And so I had to think to myself, I am a writer. I do a lot of research for everything I'm writing. I come with good intentions. My intention is never my own ego to have that on the page. My intention is always to try and understand something. So to understand my country's past, my country's present, my own place within that country, and hopefully bring that understanding or my attempt to understand it to other people within my country, outside of my country. And that it's never, what I write is never definitive. It's never the answer. This is the only way of looking at it. It's always just an attempt, an experiment. And so I had to recognize that part of writing is giving people words to speak in an attempt to understand their situations. And as long as you approach it with sensitivity, as long as you are taking time to understand what you are writing about, to do the research, and as long as the intention is good, I think that even if you make a mistake, even if people are offended, at least you know that you didn't set out to appropriate something for your own use, for your own glorification. And I always welcome people to talk to me if something I've written is offensive to them or upsetting to them. How can I learn if I'm not making mistakes?
Yeah. So let's talk about an island for a bit now. So the main character Samuel, is a weak old man. His body aches. Even thinking about anything beyond basic survival is tiring, and it is painful for him to walk. His fatigue is so vivid and real because your writing makes it so. What drove you to conceptualize such a character for a story about war, revolution, xenophobia, and the fervent desire to live?
I do smile every time I tell this story because I feel like it represents or it presents me in a way that maybe I sound like I'm a clairvoyant or something, but I'm not. But what often happens, so I'm a great believer in naps. I have a nap every day after lunch. If I can help it, I get very grumpy if I don't have a nap. And one thing that my mom has never understood is that when I am lying on the couch or my bed with my eyes closed, I am working. Maybe I'm snoring, but I'm working. My brain is at work. And so I was at a writing residency in Denmark, and I had just finished a draft of a novel that I had been working on. And I thought, oh, when I do eventually finish that novel, what shall I work on next? And then I had my nap, and as I woke out of my nap, so I was still half asleep, I had a very clear vision. And I call it a vision because I think a dream is something that comes from inside, whereas a vision comes from outside. And so it was like it was hovering in front of my face of an old African man alone on an island, and there was a lighthouse behind him, and he was staring out at the water, and he looked very angry, and there was a sense of a threat, something coming and threatening him. And that was the start of the novel. That was the start of the idea for it. At the time, there was also quite a bit in the news about the Syrian refugee crisis and different responses from the West about, sympathy and come to us and we'll take you in. Whereas regularly there are refugees from Africa going across to Europe who are drowning in their hundreds. Their boats collapse, they drown, and nothing is said about it. Or the idea is send them back. We don't want them. And so I started thinking about these different reactions to different refugees, and then refugees within South Africa, well, in Africa itself, because there are obviously countries that are better off than other countries in Africa. And so people will leave a war-torn country or impoverished country and come to South Africa or somewhere else. And that can lead to xenophobic violence. We've had xenophobic attacks in South Africa. They've been in other parts of Africa as well. And so what is it that drives people wherever they are in the world to hate others and want to keep them out?
So the contrasting effects of time are embodied by Samuel throughout the novel. Eventually, it overwhelms him. It is static because Samuel still lives in a time when his child was alive and when less cars swarmed the streets. At the same time, his back and forth between past and the present, which influences his thoughts and actions, make it dynamic. Ultimately, he sees time in everything, even perceiving crabs as masters of time. What does time truly mean to Samuel? And more importantly, what was its significance to you as you worked on the novel? How did you replicate this with the shifting nature of time? And did it bring any revelations to you?
I've never been asked this question before. No one has noticed this about time, not even myself. So, what I can say is that I wrote the novel. I had just moved to Brazil, and I was almost immediately upon arrival, I was very unhappy. I had been misled about what our life would be like in Brazil. And so my husband would go off to work every day and leave early in the morning, come home late at night. I was alone in an apartment on the 17th floor, so very, very high up. I wasn't allowed to leave the apartment because it would be too dangerous for me. I was really trapped. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have friends. My husband would come home in the evening, sit in front of the TV. On the weekends, he didn't want to go anywhere, do anything. So my life was very limited in a way, even though I'd had the idea for an island before arriving in my own little island of this apartment. It was like Samuel and I were living joint lives in a way. And I think time stood still in some ways where I felt like there was no future for me. And I suppose for Samuel, there is a sense also where he is so caught up in the past, everything that's led to this moment, that's where he's living. He's living more in the past than in the present, rather than, and he's very old, so to think of a future for him, there is no future. He only has this place where he is and the past. And I think that I was experiencing something very similar as well.
I'm skipping one question. I'm going to the next one because so a characteristic feature of an island is the precise attention to the smallest of details. We have vivid descriptions of chopping of onions and pulsing lighthouse, carefully crafted images of suds forming as he washed shorts and even his toenails. How has your writing style grown over the years to reach where it has now, and where do you envision it to take, it to take you moving forward?
Well, I suppose I started out at a very young age. I was about 6. I started out as a poet. And if anyone asked me, I would have said I'm a poet. I wasn't writing exactly brilliant poetry, but I was writing. And I think that taught me to really focus on the value of individual words and on imagery and very small moments rather than big narratives. And then as I grew older, I found that I was more naturally drawn to writing prose, but in this quite limited way. I don't write long books. I think an island is around 45,000 words. I have a novel coming out next year, also around 45,000 words. I've just finished a draft of a novel recently. It's also around 45,000 words. And so, one of the things that I enjoy doing, I love reading poetry. I read a lot of poetry. And I find that I'm quite put off by books that are very long. I feel like because I still write by hand, I'm incredibly old-fashioned. So I write by hand and I will write over and over and over and over. And I think these very long books that are written nowadays are probably because of the advent of the computer, and everyone has their laptop and they can just sit down and they don't think as much about the words and what's being written. I'm not saying that a book is bad because it's long. I'm just saying that there is a trend in that direction, and that for me, I do always focus on the very small. And I also try, so I help run a competition for debut African novelists. And we get about 150 entries a year. And one thing that we notice is that, and it might be because a lot of people are writing, because it's in English, so it might be their second language or third or fourth language, but they use the thesaurus excessively. So much so that sometimes you can't even make sense of the sentence and you feel excluded. And so what I do try to do within my own writing is I try to write simply with simple words so that complex feelings, complex situations are accessible to anyone, and that you don't have that alienation from big words that are really there to impress nobody.
Nice. So there's this character called Meria. So Meria declares Samuel a pushover, a weak and cowardly man. And this same man is later standing on the dictator's statue shouting, "I fear no violence." How do we interpret that? Did he change, or did he grow? Did he still remain a pushover? Or was he pushed over into violence? In the light of this, what can be said about the nature of violence and cowardice?
Well, that's a very philosophical question. It's very hard to respond entirely. Yes, okay. From the point of view of Samuel, I think the thing about Samuel is that he's a very ordinary person. There is nothing remarkable about him. He's not a hero. He's not in any way special. He's lived a very ordinary life. He has been involved in revolutions, in political movements, but without any great passion. It's sort of been that he joined simply to be part of something. He's not heroic. He doesn't have great belief in anything. And what we find in him is someone who's really trying to find his place in the world. He's from an early age, he has felt that he doesn't belong. His family and their village, they were kicked out by the colonizers when he was very young. So from then, he's been trying to find his place in the world and trying to find his place in a political and economic situation that's continuously changing and very unstable, and never caring about the poor, the impoverished, the ordinary citizen. And so part of this is what drives him in the end to violence, to his anger at being disappointed by the political situation, his anger at not having a place where he fits in, and that frustration of not belonging, of not being heard, not being listened to. So I think there's a mix of cowardice and violence. I don't think that violence is not cowardly, and I don't think that cowardice cannot be violent. I think the two within Samuel exist together, and almost drive one another.
Good point. So I'm going to again skip one question because you sort of answered something there. So we're coming to one of the first details we are fed about the man who washes up on the island. Once he awakens, it is the way he plops horizontally on the couch, end to end. From then on, he seems to act as though he owns the place, be it the way he leaves his clothes lying around or has Samuel do his chores. Until Samuel admits to himself, the man had made him fall, was keeping him from returning home. But much later, Samuel falls over his feet and the man helps him out at the island. So Samuel wonders if he had been wrong about his prior assumptions. So is Samuel a reliable narrator? Are we meant to view the man's existence from his perspective or attempt at our own understanding?
Thank you. So with Samuel, I wanted it to be that he is not necessarily reliable, that you are seeing things from his perspective, but then there are moments where you think, oh, but maybe he's wrong. So we're getting his impression of the refugee who's washed up on the shore, who he sees as an interloper, an inconvenience, a threat to his place, his land. And that would be, I think, most of us, if someone were to say to us, there's someone in need, would you take them in? We like to think we're good people. We'll say, yes, of course, I'll take them in, I'll look after them, I'll be good to them. But it's a very different thing when they're in your house and you start to feel, oh, they're taking over, their toothbrush is on the sink, or they've placed their mug in the wrong place. And you start to get the sense of, I really don't wish you ill, but I wish you weren't here in my home. And I think that's what happens with Samuel. I think this is also what happens in society when we have foreigners, when we have xenophobic thoughts of, we don't necessarily wish them ill, but we don't want them on our doorstep, in our way, taking over our lives. And that's what I wanted to represent, where this is Samuel's view, but it's not necessarily the correct view or the only way. Did the refugee purposely trip him up and try to, hurt him in some way, or is it Samuel who tripped himself up and is blaming the refugee because he's feeling paranoid?
The next question is somewhat similar. You can answer it in a short way. It says, by the end of the day, third day, Samuel is convinced that the man is there to rob him of his island, the way his people were robbed of their land. He reflects back upon his days in the people's faction and even repeats the same rituals of revolution. So is this meant to be a commentary on how history repeats itself? Or perhaps the inability of humans to move from it?
One of the things that I was exploring was the way in which violence begets violence. And that if you're brought up in a system that chases you away, has no place for you, one of the ways that you can react is to treat others in that same way. I mean, it's not going to be the same for everyone. Other people might react by becoming more welcoming, kinder, generous. But in this instance, Samuel, for the way he's been treated, all his experiences through his life, he that is what leads him to this kind of behavior.
Okay. So is your story about an island or perhaps even a country? We know it is set in Africa, that this place has shebeens, but beyond that, everything is ambiguous. You use deliberate caricatures such as the president and the dictator. What was the purpose behind that?
Okay, when I started looking into the research for this novel, I thought I was really interested in the history of Africa as a whole. And in the 1880s, maybe early 1890s, the powers in Europe, they came together and they divided up Africa. They sliced it up. There's a cartoon from the time of them slicing it up like a cake and saying, you get this part, you get this part, you get this part. And I was really interested in how that kernel then spread out, and many African countries have shared aspects of their history. I'm not at all trying to suggest that Africa is one country with one culture, but I was interested in the shadow that was cast by that, the scramble for Africa, the slicing up of the cake, that led to the fights for independence, and then reactions to independence, and then the rise of dictators and the failure of democracy, and also xenophobia. And so I wanted to explore that, but I knew that if I looked at it in only one country in Africa, I would have to be very specific about what happened with their situation, their presidents, or naming specific people. And I wanted it to be a lot more universal, and not only to Africa. I think that the story can be read anywhere in the world. And so I wanted to take something incredibly complex and make it, or reflect upon it in as simple a way as possible. And that's why we have this reduced space of an island. We don't have a specific country in mind, and we only really have the two main characters. So it's very limited. It was, sometimes I would wake up in the morning and it was horrific to write, because when you have two characters and only one of them can speak, and he's not very talkative, it can get very, very difficult.
Okay, so this one is it's a difficult moment in the story that you handle, like you just said. You wake up and it's horrific. Now, talk to me about the ending, Karen. The two are sharing a tender moment, and Samuel even sees his child, Leslie, who he has lost, in him. But then the man snaps a chicken's neck, and the reaction from Samuel is quick, and he bludgeons him to death with a rock. And why did you choose this route?
The simplest answer is that when I have an idea for a novel, when I start writing, I always have the first sentence and I know how it's going to end. I don't really know what's going to happen in between, but I know the ending. And I knew that there had to be this murder, killing at the end, because this is what Samuel has been driven to wanting his land for himself, not wanting outsiders. And it is a grim picture. Someone else might have written exactly the same story, but ended it very happily with them living together, making the island wonderful, living a happy life. But for what I was trying to do in terms of understanding violence, it needed to end violently. And it's because, so there is this tender moment that they have, and there is this idea that they could live happily ever after. But of course, when the refugee snaps the chicken's neck, it is a sign to Samuel, that could be me. All those paranoid thoughts he had before of, is the refugee trying to trip me? Is he trying to take over? That comes to him again. He could kill me just as easily as he killed this chicken. But it's also anger. That's my chicken. It's my land. Everything here is mine. You're not welcome. And then he resorts to violence.
Now we're moving in a slightly different direction. You mentioned coming to Sangam House. And so this question is, while working on an island, you have been a Sangam House Fellow for a short while, whose residency programs are designed for writers of some acclaim, and acclaim who have yet to achieve commercial success. In Sanskrit, Sangam means going together, convergence of rivers, just like writers that come from around the world. How did the fellowship help you? Not only when it came to writing your book, but to also foster meaningful connections with fellow writers.
So I was actually a Sangam House Fellow for a different book that I was writing, called Travels with My Father. But one of the things that I learned while I was a resident writer with Sangam House, I had the opportunity to be there for 3 months, and it was wonderful. And I think writing is incredibly lonely. I spend most of each day in my pajamas. I don't brush my hair. I don't see people. I'm trapped in the lives of my characters. And it can be very alienating when I step out of my house to take the dogs for a walk, and then I see there's a world out here that's not the same as this world that I'm busy writing. And I think it's hard sometimes for people to understand that. I told you earlier about my mom who doesn't understand that when my eyes are closed, I'm working. But I think that when you have an opportunity to be at a residency or something like this, where you meet other writers and you're able to hear about their experiences, and they say, oh, yes, I also spend all day in my pajamas, or maybe they say, well, actually, I make a point of getting dressed every day. That you learn different things and you don't feel so isolated. It can feel very, very lonely. And there's very little dignity in writing. We are so hard on ourselves. We hate ourselves. We hate our writing. We say, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And then we have agents saying it's not good enough. We have publishers saying it's not good enough. We have reviewers and critics saying it's not good enough. And when you're able to come together and have a sense of community with other writers who are also being told, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, it makes us all feel better.
So I hope Kanishka heard that. I mean, we'll send him the recording, but I hope he heard that. So let's return to the present. How are you liking the Auroville festival so far? That's a little different from the Sangam House thing and festivals in general, I guess. Is this your first time here? India plays host to a plethora of such fests, such as the Jaipur Festival, with the goal of bringing together writers and fostering a love for literature. Have you been to any of these, and what has been your experience with India, with Indian literature so far? And even beyond Sangam House, has your connection with India impacted your writing in any way?
There are quite a few questions in that one. So my experience of the Auroville Literature Festival so far, I have absolutely loved it. I expected to be jet lagged and to probably be suffering quite a bit. But really, my journey here was easy, and arriving here, I know this might sound a bit ridiculous, but it was like coming home. I felt like I was coming to a place of peace and belonging. And everyone has been very generous. I think that a lot of the time at literature festivals, there can be a lot of ego. And I haven't experienced that here. Everyone has been generous, kind, wanting to talk and share. No one is too good for the others. And what was the rest of it?
So the rest of it, okay, so then have you been to other festivals like
Oh.
Jaipur?
I haven't been to other festivals. I was invited to one earlier this year. I can't remember which one, but I wasn't able to attend because of commitment. I can't remember. And then I did do an online one, which also I don't remember. I'm very sorry. There was a slew of things that I did in the wake of and I just can't remember. I had online festivals all over the world, and it's hard to remember. But India holds a very special place in my heart. It's been very, very meaningful to me, and I even at one stage thought about moving here. I'm not sure I could do that now, having only recently returned to South Africa, which was, it's very important to me to be in South Africa, but maybe I could spend a few months of every year in India.
Probably you'll land up in Auroville. Okay. So this question, there are two more questions left. So it says, tell us a bit about your thoughts surrounding contemporary South African writing, particularly fiction, which relates to your mode of storytelling. What direction is it headed in? And are you excited about it? Does your experience with white South Africa writers stand out in any way? And how does the work you produce, particularly An Island, speak to South African literature in general?
I'm just going to return to your previous question quickly to say that what was extraordinary for me was when an island was longlisted for the Booker Prize, I got many messages from people all over Africa, but also a startling amount from people in India who were really rooting for me and sending me beautiful, lovely messages. And I found that incredibly touching because there was no reason why they needed to support me, and also no reason for them to write to me. The fact that people took the time to look me up, I'm not very easy to find on social media and all these things, that people took the time to find me and write to me was extraordinary. And I got a huge amount of support throughout Africa, a little bit within South Africa. One thing, as I said, one thing that I have started is this debut novel competition for writers from Africa. And our first, 2 years ago, our first winner was a South African writer. And this year our winner is from the Sudan. And what I'm finding is in reading all of these submissions from all over Africa, and largely from South Africa and Nigeria, but increasingly we're getting from Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Madagascar, all over. And what I found is that these are stories that are being told in very different ways. You get the ones that are very plodding, ordinary, but then you get things that are exciting, being told in different ways, in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And that makes me excited. It makes me excited to see that people want to write, they want to be telling stories. And this competition, it's not about the prize money. The prize money is tiny, tiny, tiny. It's about helping to get writers published, both within their own country and also overseas, so that we can change the way that the rest of the world looks at Africa and what should be coming out of Africa. And so I can only say that there's a lot happening. It's just a matter of getting it published, because the publishing industry is publishing the same things that they always publish because it's successful.
Okay, so what are your plans beyond an island? As we all know, your fiction engages with stories that speak to the bitter truths around us and to want to make us think rather than entertain. How do you feel about the genre, and what expectations do you have for it? How is your next work going to relate to this niche that you have carved for yourself? So please share anything about it that you are at liberty to at this point. We would love to hear about that.
I always find it very interesting and very humbling when people talk about me in such glowing terms. It makes me sound like I'm a real writer, whereas I feel like I don't know, just so I have a novel coming out in April called Crooked Seeds, and it is set in Cape Town, and it's a very grim, again, a grim story. It's about a woman who she is crippled. She lost one of her legs in an accident just around about the time of the 1994 elections, which was when South Africa became a free and fair country and everyone was made equal. And the basic story is about how she's a white woman, she considers herself handicapped by the changes in South Africa, that as a white person, she doesn't stand a chance, she's not welcome, she isn't part of the larger South Africa. And that's a type of person that you do get in South Africa, who doesn't want to participate in transformation, in seeing the country in a different way and becoming part of a community. And she's a drag on everyone else. She's always bitter and borrowing money and she's an incredibly unpleasant woman, and so, but I love her because I feel she's so damaged that she doesn't know how to exist in the world anymore. And I think that's probably similar to Samuel, who someone did say to me that he's such an unlikable character. But I love Samuel. Maybe it's because I spend so much time with these characters that even though they're horribly, horribly flawed, just as we all are. So.
Thank you, Karen. So can somebody tell me what the time is? 11:10? Oh, so we've already overshot our. Are there any questions? Could you come forward?
Hi, Karen. This is Amrit. Thank you, Anu, for doing this in Kanishka's absence. It was great listening to you, Karen. It was almost like a masterclass. Thank you for welcoming us into your world of writing. I want to know, what's your process of writing the first draft? And if you have any advice for debut novelists and aspiring writers, and also you mentioned that writing can be a very lonely thing. So how does one get through this? Get through imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and also break through into the world of or overcome the problems with publishing and face this monster called publishing. Love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, those are all the difficult questions. My process is one of pain and pain and pain. I write, I find it horrific. I think maybe somewhere I was cursed because I find the process very, very painful to try and convey something well so that it can mean something beyond myself to other people. So one thing that I have learned to do is I write by hand, and I write a first draft. I mean, I call every draft a first draft because they all feel like a first draft, but let's say the very, very first draft. Write by hand, and I write, I will just write. I won't try and make beautiful sentences. I won't try and perfect it. And then the next day when I come, I don't look back at what I've written. I just carry on. If I forget someone's name or what was happening, never mind. I just carry on until I get to the end. Because what you find a lot in writing is that people will submit a manuscript to a publisher, and the first chapter will be brilliant, and then everything else is really mediocre because they put all of their energy into that first chapter. And by the time they get to the end, they think, oh, thank goodness, I'm at the end, it's over, freedom. But really, you need to go back and you need to be rewriting over and over and over and going through that complete draft many, many, many times. So that is my process, and it's horrific. And by the end of it, you should be sick of it. You should hate it. I haven't read An Island since 2019. I can't look at it. I despise it. And then the other question, what was it? It was about the publishing. So publishing, this is my advice to you. If you can get an agent, great. But you don't need an agent. For a first novel, don't be too proud, get yourself a small publisher. And the reason for a small publisher is small publishers are the ones who are taking the chances. The big publishers, the people that determine what they publish are their marketing team. They decide what can be marketed, what can sell. So, you can write the most perfect, beautiful book ever, but if the marketing team decides they can't sell it, there's no way that's going to be published. So don't feel like going with a small publisher is a bad thing. Get a small publisher, and that can be your foot in the door. They will take a chance on you. They will work with you really personally. You'll get a good relationship rather than a big company where they've got 1,000 other authors. They don't really care about you. And then it takes time. It's slowly getting there. And the other thing, of course, is that if you are writing expecting to make money or to be famous, then I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. The few writers that are making money, that are famous, wonderful for them, but it doesn't happen for most of us. And you have to be writing because you want to be writing, rather than being driven by any other need or greed. Does that answer your questions? Was there something else? Okay. Oh, self-doubt? No, there's no help for that. You have to doubt yourself, because as soon as you stop doubting the writing, then you're lost. If you are writing, and if you've written something and you think, wow, this is perfect, this is amazing, this is brilliant, well, then you might as well give up, because there's nothing else to strive for. So self-doubt, it's crippling and horrible, but you have to have it. That's what makes you strive to get better.
Any other question? Yeah, please come forward.
Karen, you mentioned that you don't believe in computer-aided long narratives. Is it because of you are basically a poet, that is because of that you are pithy in writing, selecting every word, every sentence in nuanced style? Is it because of that you are basically a poet, that you are not believing in long narratives, just like the modern writers are following computer-aided writing? She don't believe in long narratives, computer-aided writing. Is it because of basically you are a poet, you are not following that modern style of computer-aided writing?
I think I've just always been drawn to things being said simply and not being drawn out. I think that that comes from poetry, also from the way that I appreciate language and narratives. A narrative poem or a short story or a novel, something short, I find that there can be too many distractions if things become too long.
You believe in ruminating over every word and every sentence?
Yeah.
Just like a poet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
If there's no one else, we can just wrap up this session. Karen, thank you so much. And I hope to see you here again. I think you got all the signs there that you're going to coming back here with us. There's something coming for you. It's a little gift coming for you. Just a moment. Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. I had a wonderful time, and I hope that you'll enjoy the rest of your day here. Thank you.